Okay, well, let's get started. I want to thank everyone for tuning into this community Zoom. I'm really excited about this conversation and presentation today with Daron Evans, who's one of our newest members on MicroCapClub. I've known Daron for, I don't know, maybe it's going on 4, 5, 6 years. And we got to know each other when he was the CEO of a microcap company, and I gained a lot of respect for him at that time. After he stepped down as CEO in that position, I kept in contact, and we talk, I don't know, maybe once a quarter or once every 6 months or so since then. And only later did I realize how talented Daron was and skilled he was at microcap life science investing. And earlier this year, I was talking to Daron, and I told him, I was like, you should really apply to get into MicroCapClub, because I would love to get more high quality discussion going on life science companies. And so he was kind enough to apply, and he got in. And so I'm really excited for not only his activity on the forum and the discussions that he can provide into life science companies, but also doing sessions like this. When he was the CEO of the public company, I remember he had just a very commonsensical, kind of straight shooting demeanor about him. There was no BS about what he was doing, and I remember that about him. And I think you'll see and hear that in his presentation today, especially in life science, which I think generally the investment public views as sort of voodoo investing, if we're being honest, because they don't have the proper skills or framework to analyze life science opportunities. Daron is probably one of the few people that I know, a few investors that I know that would be up for the challenge of educating us a little bit on how he invests in this area. So as a reminder, before we get started today, during the presentation, during the conversation, if you have any questions, feel free to add them, the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen, click there and you can type in your questions there, and we'll get them answered either in real time if it's relevant to the discussion we're having, or at the end of the conversation. We'll get to them then. Daron, thanks for being a member of MicroCapClub, and thanks for coming on here and educating us about the life science opportunity.
Yeah, no worries, man. Thanks for inviting me to join it. This is so far been a great forum. Pretty good discussions on a lot of companies that I hadn't looked at yet, so it's a good starting point. So we'll just jump into it. So the question on life science is how do you get it? How do you understand it? So this is my background, if you understand where I come from. Chemical engineer, then an MBA, and then I decided I actually like science more than finance, so I went back and got a biomedical engineering degree, consulting background. My first startup was moronic to go do it, but it was interesting. It was putting brain cells on a chip and trying to measure the reactions and create a diagnostic. I had no business doing it, but it was fascinating and fun. We survived a couple of years and sold the IP, but it was a good experience. That got me into Johnson & Johnson, which was, everybody knows. I joined Sios, had a heart failure drug called Natracor and a big cancer pipeline. Came in as a portfolio and program manager. Did some M&A stuff as well. Then joined Vistagon, mostly for personal reasons. My wife at the time her family's from Georgia, and Vistagon's based in Jacksonville. It seemed like a logical thing to do, but realized that big pharma wasn't for me. So then I joined Nile Therapeutics, which was a startup. I was number 2, came in as operational officer. We went, did a $20 million Series A, reverse merged, went public, went to Pink Sheet Company, got a NASDAQ, survived for a little while. This was during the crash, so it was raising money. It was hard, but we survived for like 8 years total, kind of 5 years past the crash. Sold ourselves to Capricorn. But that got a good experience in depth about how to make a drug. There's the high level stuff where it doesn't have an unmet need, what happens. But the things that trip up drug trials are the assays. Is your bioanalytical assay good enough for releasing your drug? Because if you see all the CRLs that come out over manufacturing issues, there's 75,000 things you have to do to launch a drug. And most of them don't involve anything with the science and biology. It's pure chemistry and just tracking the chemistry. And so unless you've done that, you just don't understand, is what they say a problem, or is it not a big deal? So there's actually an example later we'll talk about that. And then I started the family office after we sold the Capricorn. You know, done pretty well. I've had a couple of years of multiple 100-year returns. You know, I have 10 baggers. I've also had years we get cut in half. That's just sort of the way the life science world works. Then I joined the board at Nephros, and after about a year and a half, got a little bit lippy, decided the strategy was a bit wrong, and then they asked me to take over. You know, so we turned around from a 10 million market cap to over 100 by the time I left. You know, since then it's hasn't gone as well as it could have, but it's okay. It's good set of products, good people. Currently, I'm working on a life science opportunity fund, and I'm incubating a small biotech. So, why life science? You know, it's actually a fascinating space, and I actually believe at some point in time when we find the bottom, we're going to have a 12 to 18 month run of 100% returns in total for the beta. And if you can find a couple of good winners, I think there should be a couple of, you know, 5 or 10 baggers out there. It only takes one to make you seem like you're really smart and make you a lot of money. So this is definitely a high risk, high reward space. But I think given the depth of the bear market for the XBI and other sort of small biotechs, it's actually a really good time to try to pick some winners. Just kind of hang on for the ride, because once it happens, it should happen pretty fast. So what do I do? So it really starts off with screening. And the thing about life science and the biotech world is you can't look at a company from the top level and think, know anything about it. So the best way I found to screen is to go to, either Rodman or the Biotech Showcase, one of those bigger conferences that has, 500 companies, and pick 40, and then talk to them and get just a high level of where's their cash, do they have a product that's interesting, does the team know what they're doing, is there big upside potential? So you do this high level screen, and if you walk out of that, 3 days of meetings and 40 to 50 meetings, if you walk out with 2 or 3 in your head thinking, wow, that's pretty cool, that's a pretty good screen. There's also other screens where you look for which ones are trading below cash, and you kind of sift through 100 of them to see if they have assets, or just talk to your friends, get some ideas. But it all starts with kind of the high level of, if they don't have enough cash, forget about it, right? Because the thing about we know, if you're a small company with no revenues and you have to raise money, then you'll get crushed. I've got an example of that later, but that sort of death spiral is multiplied by 10 for life science, because there's no chance for revenue anytime soon. So that everyone knows you have to raise money, but are sort of balancing when you raise versus when you might do a deal. So the second step is the scientific review. And this is where if you don't have a science background, it's really hard to do this kind of review, but you can trust analysts. Most of the analysts in this space that cover the small caps, like they're PhDs, they're molecular biologists, they're sometimes physicians. They'll get a good idea if there's a there. So you really start from the mechanism of action. So what does the drug do? Does it actually have a purpose in life, or is it a me too? If you can find something that has a purpose in life, then you'll probably have a lot more upside than a me too. But a me too also has legs. I mean, how many sort of second to market drugs out there that made a lot of money? You also have to see if is there an actual space for it. Sometimes they can have a brilliant idea, but the incremental improvement over an existing product isn't enough to justify going against it, because sometimes that product will be generic in 5 years and there's sort of no chance for upside. So it's a screen of science. You can probably find people to help you with that. It's easier if you've read the space. Like over the last 10 years or so, I've probably screened 500 companies, somewhere in there. So I've seen all kinds of products. Things I try to avoid are Alzheimer's things. I try to avoid any sort of large cardiovascular plays. But other than that, everything these small cap companies, they try to in general do laser shots, which makes the story pretty easy. And that's actually one of the other things I like about MicroCap, is that these big companies like Amgen or Gilead, there's so many programs. There's no way that any one mind can absorb all of them and sort of risk weight them and put a valuation on them. So they're really sort of back end cash flow type companies. These early stage, if they have 1 or 2 assets, you can really get to know them. You can get to know the assets. You can call the doctors that might prescribe this stuff, and you can put a real valuation on the project, which is the program, and then sort of stack it up into a value for the company. But anything that has 5 or more assets, it's just like, how are you going to figure those out? When you multiply that by 10 companies, there's no way any single person is going to get to know the way you should know a program if you have to do 50 of them at once. So like, I try to focus on companies that have like 1 or 2 assets, or a single asset with sort of 2 or 3 indications. So there's multiple shots on goal, and then just figure out whether or not they have a purpose in life. And then for the deeper diligence, you got to talk to management. You got to understand, do they know what they're doing? Or is this a bunch of financiers who license an asset that makes money? You know, or do they really know what they're doing? Are they physician scientists that decided they have a passion for this indication or for this space? And you know, how deep do they know how to make drugs? Have they done it before, or are they, again, sort of playing house and they've outsourced it all? You know, when my first company's Nile, we had a staff of 8 at some point in time. The crash came, we downsized, and it ended up being a staff of 2. So you have myself and a doctor for most of the sort of back end years. You know, so would you as an investor trust those 2 people to make a drug? You know, that's a question you got to ask yourself. You know, if they know enough, yes, you can, because you can outsource and sort of, again, laser shot different skill sets. But you have to understand whether the management team has the broad capabilities to be able to do that. And if, you know, because I've done it before, I can ask really pointed questions on certain things and sort of see if their eyeballs light up and go, oh, yes, we thought about that. Or like, I don't know, I outsourced that to my vendor. You know, because you can kind of tease out. I think one of the questions I got before this was, how do you know when to say no? Well, if you ask about release assays and they have no idea what you're talking about, that's probably a good sign that you should say no. So there's these little things that are part of the process that, you know, I don't say I try to trip them up, but I definitely try to Columbo my way into figuring out if they know what they're doing, because 2 people can run a drug company if it's a single product. Pretty easy to do, actually. But if they don't know the 75,000 steps that takes to get there, then how do they watch for it? Like, how do they watch for the boogeyman? I don't think people remember Portola a couple years ago. You know, Bill List was CEO, and he was pushing this factor 10A inhibitor plus a couple other drugs. One thing I knew that he didn't do is he didn't want to spend money on CMC. So that's the manufacturing control. And so when it got time to have the PDUFA for their inhibitor, I was like, oh, it's going to fail. Like, there's no way, because I knew one of the guys in the CMC group who just kept complaining about not getting enough funding for his group. Like, well, if you don't get enough funding for your chemistry controls, that's really one of the places the FDA loves to say, sorry, it's not safe because you didn't have this assay. So if you ask those kind of questions and see where the CEO's head is, then you can figure out whether they're thinking about all the risks they need to, or if they add more risk. But by the way, that ended up being a great investment once it had its crash, and because eventually the CMC things are easy to figure out. If the biology doesn't work, there's no way it's going to figure out. But CMC is actually a great indicator of, if there's a failure, they get crushed, and then there's an opportunity for upside. And then so the last step is to figure out the trade. You know, when do I get in? Do I get in now, or do I just sort of space it out over 12 months? The nice thing about life science is that you can actually have a day job and still track a lot of companies, because the events are really spread out. Like, you're not worried about the quarter to quarter number of customers absorbed or what have you. There's a trial and it starts in February 2021. It'll end in February 2024 or something like that. So once you understand, you know, what are the time points, how's the cash get us there, you can figure out over time, well, it's probably going to fade, but I want to be exposed. So let's go ahead and just sort of figure out when I'm going to buy over the next 12 months to get to the full position, and then have my exit points. And if you get dips below a certain point, then you got to cut bait, or you double down because you believe in the science and you know that the market doesn't get it. So you kind of have to have that all kind of mapped out. So when you get back to it in a month, because nothing's happened, you kind of refresh your memory and figure out, okay, is my map still right, or do I have to modify it? So this is kind of the process. There's no actual formula, and you never do, like, I don't do it. It doesn't really go 1, 2, 3, 4. It goes 1, and then 3, and then 2, and then to 4. Does that make sense? Back to 2. talk to management again. So it's a iterative process of trying to figure out and triangulate, but eventually you get to a point of conviction. You're like, okay, I get this. I want to be in it. And then you know that 1 in 10 works. So you got to make sure you have 10 bets. So this is one of my early investments that it's kind of a good example of biotechs that, it's a rocky road. Early on, I met them at a biotech showcase for JP Morgan, one of the side shows. And out of the 40 meetings, this is the one that's like, wow, it's a very clean molecular program. It's a P2X3, I forget the name of the receptor, but it's a chronic cough indication. They had a more potent drug, more specific drug than the Merck drug that was in the lead. But they had a failure prior to 617 in a different program where they just got crushed. They got crushed in a phase 3, but they had lots of money. And so they found this other asset as a preclinical. So they went from a phase 3 asset to preclinical. So their valuation got down to, I don't know, $20 million with $40 million in cash. But they had this really nice story that was, we had this nice asset. It's a more specific molecule to bind the receptor than the Merck. The Merck issue has a little bleed. So there's a PX, there's a 1, 2, and a 3 of this receptor subsets. The Merck was primarily a 1, but a little bit of a 2, a little bit of a 3. And for this receptor, it's not only in the throat, which causes the trigger for the cough, but also in the taste buds. And so this Merck asset had a side effect of you can't taste stuff. So, okay, I stopped coughing, but now I can't taste my coffee. So like, do I care? I don't know. But this blue company had this very specific that they licensed out of a Canadian lab that was sort of dying, that in theory would have had more targeting to the chronic cough trigger and less to the taste. And so they could have a safer or less inconvenient asset, and they could be the winner. Now there are 4 players in the market. These guys, were they going to win? I don't know. But they had enough cash to figure it out, and they were just a bunch of smart people who knew what they're doing. So I started feathering in. I wrote an article about them, and this is pretty cool. And then you watch, and as you watch on, they had great phase 1 data, and the taste issue didn't come up. There's like one patient in the high dose group that had a taste problem. That's great, because in Merck, it was at that high dose. So okay, so checkbox theory's there. Keep going. Gotten their phase 2 going. And this was the efficacy study. They, in this process, they got a lot of excitement because the Merck drug made a lot of good progress. They seemed like they were the better asset, but 2 years behind. They decided to get on NASDAQ. They raised a bunch of money. And one thing about Canadian companies that I always appreciate that they do better their job than American companies is they always make sure they have enough cash. Right. So, cash is, if you don't have enough cash, you die. These guys raised money at the right times, raised a lot of it. Always take more than you want, and get so you have year of life after whatever inflection point, and then as it works. So for this asset and for many others in the life science space, if I buy it at some point lower and it runs up into data sets, I generally pull off at least my initial investment, if not more. So that I can sort of play with house money. Playing with house money is really fun and easy. And if you lose, whatever. And if you win, bring it on. So in this one, I took some off the table at the time of the phase 2 study. And, the market saw it and was like, oh, total failure. Drug's terrible. I'm like, oh. But then I'll go forward and they come back. But then you look at the data set. And this is where, if you understand how to design trials, then you know that the goal is to find a dose in a patient group that works. So if the top line fails, it doesn't matter at all. Did you find the dose, and does the patient group work? So if you look on the left side, the top line data for all of the p-values and there's different dose groups, only the top dose was a hit. So the p-value has to be less than 0.05. That means 95% of patients this will work for. In this case, only the top dose did it. Terribly. If you read on Endpoints News, Bellus fails their trial. But then when you look at the subgroups, they stratified, they pre-specified the stratification so that you sort of trust it better. Those with lots of coughs, like 30 or more per hour, 0.0005 at the low dose group. Like, wow, that's amazing. And then the 20 or more coughs, 0.001. Whoa, that's also amazing. So really, you found the dose and you found the patient subgroup that it works for. So for me, this is perfect. All right, so this is one where, like, I even wrote endpoints. The editors like, why did you guys say this was a failure? Like, you have no idea what you're talking about. They're like, well, look at the top line data. I'm like, and so then the stock crashes. The only issue I have in this whole process with them is that they raised money down here after the crash. They raised $40 million. They already had, I forget the most. They had enough cash to see the interim results for this phase 2B study, which was, in the right patient group with the right dose. But they just wanted a buffer. So okay, fine. And they got some good investors to get into it. So I was annoyed that it diluted it at the price levels. But I tripled down because this was going to work. No way it wasn't going to work. Based on this data and the sets. And oh, by the way, they had to cut it off a bit early because of COVID, and so they didn't have a full data set. Anyway, so this was just a buy it, close your eyes, see how it goes. So as they get through, they had positive interim results. The Data Safety Monitoring Committee said, go ahead and keep going. And then when they finally got positive results, it was amazing. So I actually fully bailed out at the phase 2 budget results. They raised $100 million, another $153 million to be able to go run the phase 3. Oh, by the way, Merck's drug got rejected by the FDA because they didn't sort of see the risk benefit. The taste issue was there. Their efficacy wasn't as great as they could because they were doing a lower dose to avoid the taste issue. So they said, go back to the drawing board. The other programs, Shinogi's program, kind of got delayed. They have to go run phase 2B again. So now this is the lead compound. But it was also valued at a high point. And it's like, well, but my upside is not going to be 5x anymore. It might be 30%. So at that point in time, I generally pull off because there's not enough there. When the stock started going down again, because what happens in life sciences, between this one event and the next data point is if it's 2 years, it'll just drift down, just because people lose interest, nothing happening, no news. So at some point, I actually was like, well, this is pretty low. So I went and bought it again. And I actually did not expect them to get bought out by GSK. At this point in time, I figured if they didn't buy it out of the phase 2B, they would have waited for the phase 3 or even registration. So this is the point in time where I did not expect to have it. So I didn't have that big of a position, but I figured it was low enough now that it's hard to lose long term. And they got bought out. So long story about how a perfect mechanism, best in class mechanism in a small company that no one heard about, fully funded, because when Canadian Exchange probably had no real knowledge of funds here. But good management, plenty of cash, good mechanism of action, and a chance to kill it, and these guys did. So it's a good win. And this is Fennec, the next one. This is the one I actually wrote about for the MicroCapClub. This is on Seeking Alpha. This is one of my favorites. This is one where science on the drug is great. This is for a drug to prevent pediatric hearing loss for kids who has cancer and getting cisplatin. I don't know if you know this, but about half of the kids who have cancer and get cisplatin will lose full or partial hearing. And so this is a drug that helps them prevent that. It's sort of co-administered with a cisplatin to prevent some of the damage that happens in the ears. 85% of kids survive cancer, which is fantastic. But if they survive cancer and they're deaf, then and they could have avoided it. It's one that's there. So it's a nice little drug. Met them after they had their phase 3 data, and they were starting to apply for their license. What got me interested is that they were taking a long time to apply. So they finished the data, And fully a year later, they had not yet filed their BLA, or the NDA, sorry. And so people were getting annoyed, and they're like, why? These guys are terrible. Why can't they get this thing in? So the stock started drifting down. And so I was like, well, this seems like a great indication. There's no way this won't get approved. This is a highly unmet need. Like, what insurance company is going to say no to preventing kids hearing loss in a cancer patient for a child? And it was clearly effective in the phase 3. So it took them another 6 months to be able to complete their NDA. So in this one, I was sort of accumulating slowly. As they got to the first PDUFA date, it was one that, again, it raised up before the PDUFA date, so I could take my house money off, or my investment off, play with house money. Then they got a CRL for manufacturing. Well, at this point in time, I'd spoken to them, and they also they were very unclear about the FDA inspections of the facility. They used an outsource to make it, and when you look back, a year later, they had a 483 of the inspection during the inspection, and they didn't disclose it, which I think is not right. But this was a CRL for manufacturing issues that was easily fixable because it was in process release testing. I'm like, wow, that's easy to fix. Just takes time and money. What they didn't tell the world for a little while was that the manufacturer just had some issues, and so as a hedge, because they raised money right before the PDUFA, which was smart, they were able to go invest in a second manufacturing line to be able to make sure the first one, if it worked, great. If not, I've got a better, I'm spending more money this time doing it right. So they put together a program where they were going to fix the first site, but as a backup, go ahead and work on the second, because to get a drug released, you have to have 3 lots, fully processed, commercial lots that the FDA sort of sees all the data for and can then approve it. So I went back in over the next year, which was slow. They were working on repairing the first one and building the second. When they applied for the second time, they actually applied on the repaired first line. And I had my doubts as to whether or not it was going to work. So I pulled some money off, and it didn't work. Like, oh, why did you not just do it right the first time? So one thing to think about in these small companies is, do they try to go to the lowest bidder, or do they go to the person who will get it right, or the group that will get it right? And a lot of those questions that when I get my deep dives, I'll ask, who they get into, why they chose them, to understand if they were going for the penny wise pound foolish thing, or if they actually were thinking about the science. So the management team had failed a number of times. They lost a lot of street credibility, but I think they learned their lesson. And when they got their second CRL, it dropped even further. And it was a great time to just load up, because they were going to make it this time. You're not going to fail 3 times on a manufacturing issue. And if you do, you're fired. Everybody's fired. The board's fired. Got to restart. So I really loaded up on this last one. They got their approval on the second line. They recently got their European approval. And they've launched the drug. What makes them a good investment opportunity, even still today, is that because they have a bad reputation for being terrible in the past, people don't believe they're going to launch the drug right. But what they're doing is they in this process in the past, they actually spent good money on a good commercial launch person who mapped the plan out. They have the plan written, and they're following the plan. They're doing a good job following the plan. And what you'll find out over the next few weeks or months as they get the next revenue thing is the revenue is going to start doubling each quarter, because as they get a hospital over the line on getting on formulary and payment process, like, there's absolutely no insurance company who says no to these guys, to this drug. Like, you cannot say no to preventing hearing loss in a child cancer patient. And so every time they get, they've gotten Releasee, which is in I think Boston, and the Philadelphia Children's. They've gotten some big ones, and this is through conversations with management. They've gotten some really big pediatric oncology hospitals who have quarter or half of the market on board, and now you're just not going to not do this. Like, are you going to be the doctor who says, no, I'm not going to spend an extra 30 grand on your child to prevent, so that he or she can have hearing later on in life. Even though I'm saving them from this life-threatening situation, this is not going to happen. So they just got their J code as well. So this will become a big drug. And big in this space is sort of 300 to 400 million. And these guys have. There's another thing that I like about it. The board is tired of being a board. The management's tired of being management. Everyone has incentives for this thing to get sold. In fact, if they don't close by the end of the year, they lose like $4 million of extra incentives. So they'll double sales from Q1 back to Q2. They'll continue throughout the year to grow at a crazy rate. They've got European approval. This is one of those companies that will sell out 14, 18, somewhere in there. And if they don't, they'll be cash flow positive by Q4, and you don't care, because they'll be able to sort of just start growing revenue. So this has been a good bet. Right now, it's one of my bigger bets. And it's got a good one. But the value comes from the trip up and the things they should have done right. But if they get it right, if they learn from their mistakes and they get it right the next time, this is life science. You sort of think about 3 or 4 times you'll enter and exit on any given bet, just based on the crazy roller coaster. Just got to believe that they are eventually on the right track, and this is one I think they are.
Darren, I have a couple questions for you. I probably should have asked this before we started, but could you go through and kind of define what these terms mean for people that aren't familiar with PDUFA date or CRL or NDA? Maybe go through those.
Yeah, great. Sorry, jumping in. So an NDA is not a non-disclosure agreement. It's actually a submission for approval of a new drug application. There's also a BLA, so a biologics license application. So those are the submissions to the FDA. So you've done your preclinical, your phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. You've got your great data. You've done your 3 lots of commercial. You put all that package together and you submit it. And there's a group at the FDA whose job in life is to review literally feet of documents. Now it's electronic, but in the old days, even for like a phase 2 study, it would be, we used to print them out and ship them, they'd be 1.5 feet of documents just for a phase 2 study. So you multiply that by 15 for the whole program. Some of these biologics, because of all the in-process testing and the data behind it, these things could be 20 feet high if you were to stack them up. So that's what the NDA is. There's also the IND, which is the investigational new drug. So they might not be the right words for it, but that's when you say, hey, I've tested a bunch of animals. Can I test this on college kids and bums? That's my colloquialism for it. But people who take money to put random drugs in their body, which we are very thankful for. But sort of phase 1, phase 2, that's how you get to that stage, is you go to the FDA and you file an IND and they say, yes, we believe you've done enough testing to be able to put it in humans. So the CRL is a complete response letter. That means the FDA says, nope. And they'll generally give a reason. Sometimes they don't, for months, and you have to sue them for it. But the CRL is actually, for me, is a sign of, hey, let's figure out what happened, because this could be an opportunity. And if it's manufacturing, then it's usually fixable. If it's, there's one called Avenue Therapeutics, the FDA just didn't think they did enough testing, so they've got to run into phase 3. Like, well, that's a lot of money. That'll take a long time. I'm not going there for now. But you figure out why the CRL is given. That's a good one. And then the PDUFA date is the date at which the FDA gives themselves to say yes or no. And usually they wait till the absolute last minute to tell you that, or sometimes like the day after. So it's IND is the filing to be able to get into humans. The NDA or BLA is the filing to say, hey, can I sell this thing to be commercial? PDUFA date is the date at which they say yes or no. And that's generally for stocks, they'll sort of freeze trading around that date so that nobody has any 30 seconds or 3 seconds or 0.3 seconds or whatever these computers can do to get an advantage on those people. So those are the basics. Any other terms I forgot to mention?
I think you got most of them. I think you have another case study. I have a few more questions, but I'll wait till then.
Okay. So as I said, my actual PoC Capital fund is one that I've had years of. I think my best year was like 400%. Pretty good year. but I've also lost half in a given year. And this is how you lose half. And this is Checkpoint. It's one that I love to hate. I still think it's a good drug. I think it's going to get approved. I think it's going to have a place in the treatment paradigm. This is what happens when you nickel and dime your way through a drug program. So this is a Fortress biotech company. Fortress is Lindsay Roosevelt and a bunch of Mike Weiss and a couple others. They've been in the business for a very long time. They are financiers who know a lot about drugs. They do have good ideas. Sometimes they just are penny wise, pound foolish. So this is a checkpoint inhibitor. Everyone knows that checkpoint inhibitors are a mainstay in the life. This company actually has amazing data. Their data beats Keytruda, if you guys know that one, which is like the behemoth of the checkpoint inhibitors for a certain cancer. It's let me see what I think it's the squamous cell, so it's a skin cancer. So their drug is better than Keytruda. So you think, wow, better than Keytruda, got good phase 3 data. This thing should be a winner. So prior to, you see when I entered, so they completed their enrollment. So CSSS, so complicated squamous cell. They finished enrollment. They were kind of leading into data. Their data was going to be good. But what did they do? They just kept tapping the ATM. Like they're worth $250 million. They had data coming. They knew that it's expensive to file a license, BLA, and to launch a drug. And if you're gonna get bought out, you can't hope to get bought out before you need to. You have to go plan to build a company and then get bought out, because hope is not a strategy. This is actually one of the reasons why at Nephros I ended up taking over, is because the previous CEO just hoped to get bought. I'm like, no, you can't do that. You got to go build a business, and if it works, then someone will buy you. If it doesn't, then you didn't get bought. So Checkpoint was ATMing their way through this process at a time, early in 20 and 21. That's fine, but in the beginning of a bear market, you can't ATM your way as a biotech. You have to go raise the money you need, so you don't need money. Because right now, so starting in mid 2021, everyone knows they needed to raise money because they're burning $8-9 million a quarter. They were going into data, and they were going into a filing and perhaps commercial launch. They may get bought along the way. Fantastic. What happened is that their trading volumes started drying up, and some people kind of believed, but they really didn't have what they needed to get through. They also decided to start another phase 3 study to sort of build value, but they didn't have the money for it, which is moronic. And when the data came, finally, it was great. They kind of got there. And what I actually did is I bought the stock, and because the call premium was so big, I sold calls against it. So the stock was trading in the sort of low twos, the low to mid twos, and the call premium was such that even for like 2 months, my cost was like 80 cents. So great. How can you lose there? Well, if you lose there, if you still need money, you don't raise it, and you keep ATMing it, the data comes out and it's great. And then people realize, oh, they got to raise a ton of money. Cash burn increased. And so they kept going down. I'm like, oh, come on, guys, just raise enough money to do it. And then they didn't. And then the cash burn increased because they have to finish the 3 lots that we talked about in BLA. Like when you do a biologic, which this is, it's really expensive. And as you prepare for this filing. So it took them a year to get through from data to be able to file a BLA, because they had to make more lots, because they hadn't done it before, because they hadn't raised enough money. And then in this time, they were just doing ATM, cash burn increased, and it just started going down. And then on the trail, he would tell us, oh, all these companies who have good phase 3 data, they can just borrow the money because it's coming. Like, yes, you can. Usually, maybe post-COVID crash, world financial crash, that was actually a good strategy. Is if you had enough money to get through to the PDUFA, but not to get past it, you could always borrow the money, because it'll be a commercial drug. That's great. If you have commercial ability and you have revenue coming, you can borrow money. If you don't, then you shouldn't, because that just stacks up. So these guys talked about getting money. They couldn't get it done. The biotech bear market said, no, the venture type funding for these kinds of programs didn't happen. So then they got stuck, and then they got stuck, and then they got stuck, and then the only offers they got were probably from funds. And this, if you look on the right hand side, there's an 8 million, 8 million, 6 million, 10 million. These are all single or double handle deals. No one else is invited to participate. They have 200% warrant coverage, and all this happened because they couldn't get the debt they thought they can get, and then they got too close to the end, and now they're just dead, and they're getting diluted to crazy. And I think the market cap's now like $34, $40 million. Again, great data, beat Keytruda. All they had to do was take the pill, raise $100 million, and put this thing to bed. No more money. So, like, let's get this financial risk off the table. And now what they've done is they've nickel and dimed with 200% warrant coverage 4 times in a row. They'll do it a 5th time. They'll do it a 6th time. They have their PDUFAs in January. They don't have the money to get there. I wrote a Seeking Alpha about it, about how bad manager can destroy the value of a company even with a good drug. So this was one of my losses for last year. This year, at some point in time, I might actually buy right before the PDUFA because I think it's going to win. Like, it's good data. What I wouldn't want to do is, be part of the trickle down or the step down or whatever happens with these next 2 financings that have to come if they keep doing $8 and $10 million financings. And this is like this isn't a life science story, right? How many companies do you know that run out of money or get close to running out, and people see they're running out and they have to raise it at the wrong time and they get crushed? So it just happens in life science. I think they get crushed more because there's no revenue, there's no other option. You can't turn on a business development deal and turn on licensing money or non-dilutive capital. If you people realize you absolutely have to have money and have no options, you just get crushed. And these guys will get crushed again and again until they get PDUFA. And when they get that, they still might get crushed because they don't have enough money to launch it. And the big pharmas, they know that stuff. Will somebody buy them? Yes. Will it be big pharma? Probably not anymore. They probably lost all their shine, being crushed so much. So it'll be a spec pharma or someone who wants to use them in conjunction with something else. But this is
Daron. Why wouldn't like a larger pharma? Why wouldn't they just take the gamble and just buy them out now ahead of the PDUFA?
So usually they don't do that. Usually they'd rather pay a premium and have a for sure than to take a risk on a PDUFA. I mean, it's even with good data, you may get a CRL for manufacturing reasons. You may there's very few big wins that I've seen prior to the PDUFA. So the blue was unexpected to happen mid phase 3. If you guys all remember Cougar, J&J bought them like 3 months before the PDUFA, which I thought was what? Are you crazy? But it worked, and now it's one of the biggest prostate cancer drugs out there. It's amiodarone, I think. So usually they'll happy to be tee up the term sheets. Everything's sort of set and go. In my Nile days, we had big pharma term sheets. They're like, yeah, we'll wait until we see that data from that trial. I'm like, it's like 6 months away. They're infinitely patient because they're not going anywhere. And the thing about the reputation of the business development group, it hinges upon the success of what they buy or their license. And when your balance sheet is like Pfizer right now has an extra $30 billion a quarter for the last couple of quarters to buy stuff. Well, they made an investment in Caribou a couple of days ago, $25 million. That actually is probably a death knell for Caribou because that means Pfizer's in, they're going to watch it, and they'll just wait until it's perfect. Which means Caribou's got to raise rounds, 2 or 3 or more rounds before Pfizer does that. Like same with Cardiff. I like that company. Used to own a few % of it. Pfizer went into it at $7, and they haven't touched it since. And they're infinitely patient. So I don't think anybody would buy this until the PDUFA, and even then, they may wait until they really get a better deal. Because if you don't have an auction process and more than one bidder, but for this one they may not, because it's a single indication, a single PDUFA. It did beat Keytruda, but then you'd have to go fight Keytruda for marketing. So there's probably 1 or 2 companies where this is perfect for. So it's it'll be a drug. Will it be a 10-bagger from here? No. It could be if there wasn't as many warrants out there and sort of stacked into it.
When you think about your position sizing and the amount of positions, I think in the one slide where you talk about your strategy, you mentioned around 15, I believe. Has that just been through experience that kind of in that 10 to 15 is kind of the proper amount given the risk reward of each one of those bets? How do you, and also, how do you think about weighting and position sizing in these?
Yeah. So the way I theoretically weight, the way I actually weight are completely different. So theoretically, you'd follow portfolio theory, and if you have 10 positions, you have 1/10 each, and you play it like that. I tend to get high conviction in certain things and double down and triple down. So I won't do more than triple down anymore. Although that's how I had my biggest win, is I think I was a half into one stock. I actually carded. Bought a bunch at when it was $1 something, it ran to 20 something. To pull a lot off on the way, and so it was pure. This is all pure house money. But didn't sell it all the way down. I kept a bunch because I figured it would eventually play out, especially when Pfizer put money in. But it's in theory, and this is actually the next slide I'll show you. This is what would happen if I actually did my 1/10 with the occasional double versus what my actual PoC Capital. So as I move into actually thinking about taking money from others, I have partners who are more religious about sort of right sizing and sort of keeping it to a 1/10 portion. So and then even in that 1/10, as we talk about the mapping, if you have a year between now and when data comes out, then what you want to do is you'll do a 10th every month. Or something like that. So, or if it goes way down, then below cash, and you can think about adding more. But you also want to you want to average in because it's a long game, and so just random stuff happens. So if you have your whole position and then it gets cut in half, like, oh crap. So if there's literally no meaningful data expected between now and a year, then just wait and just take the low, take 1,000 shares a day, whatever it is. But ideally you'd stick to your knitting and do sort of 1/10 for over a 10 share position.
Okay. And it seems like you mentioned it before, you're basically betting on these things, and you have these 6-month, 12-month, 24-month time periods in between each one of these potential catalysts, and the stocks tend to drift in between these different points of time and drift lower and lower. I mean, wouldn't it make sense to just kind of always wait until 1 or 2 or 3 or 6 months, depending on that time frame, before, and just sell the rip, because it seems like it gets overextended always, at least by the charts, and then it drifts again? Or isn't that the wrong way?
So that's actually, so when you map it, you figure out, okay, what are the triggers and when do I expect something to happen? And when it does, you always take money off the table. If it runs up 40% in one day, it'll come back down. So you take some off, and then you add back later. There's called Selectar was one that I was kind of watching. But they have these random news events, and that's what these CEOs try to do, is they just try to make sure people are aware of what's happening. And sometimes you can predict it, sometimes you can't. So this one Selectar, they put out a press release that said, "Hey, we got a patent on our molecule." Okay, like you're supposed to. That's your job. The stock went up 100%. And I just bought a little piece of it, and it went up 100%. I'm like, all right, I got to take it off. Came right back down. So like you'll have these sort of random things, or sometimes who like CymaBay is one that, like, a competitor had bad data come out, and so now they sort of will have a bigger share of the market. And so their stock went up 30% or something over the last couple of days. Well, that's probably not going to last. They're actually one that I got in early. I've already made my house money exit. They'll have these weird blips, and I think one of their blips will be actually the approval. But their current plan is to launch themselves. And there's a company called Stone Pine, it's an investment company. These are really smart guys. If anybody knows them, their specialty is companies who get approvals, who then launch drugs, and they tend to wait until they have their first or second quarter where they did not meet analyst expectations and their stock crashed, And they've also, by the way, shifted their investment base from the hope and dreamers who want the approval to the revenue players who have different expectations. So there's this, this happened to Fennec too. Once you get your approval, if you're going to launch it yourself, you're probably going to drop a lot before you sort of catch your stride. So there's some timing issues there, but there's all these little things that happen. And anytime you have a run up on one of these life science stocks, yeah, you definitely want to feather it out a little bit because it'll drift back down. Very rarely do they run up and they raise a bunch of money and then they keep going, right? Although you know, Viking was a winner a couple of years ago. They raised money, ran up, raised more money, ran up again, raised more money, ran up again. Then eventually they dropped again. But during that time, if you'd sold out like I did on the first 100% rise, expecting it to drop down a bit, the next 100% rise you missed. So you almost want to just sort of feather in and feather out. You always have a little bit if you haven't hit. My goal was to wait for certain data sets. If I haven't hit that yet, I probably should still have some. But you know, as it runs up, you take some off because that's feeling like with gravity. So.
Yeah. And I think one of the commonalities between life science investing and any microcap investing is just our biggest risk is dilution. You know, and having a management team that doesn't know how or can't raise money at the right time or appropriately, and in the wrong ways. So when you look at new ideas, is the thing that leads you into the idea the science, the potential drug, or is it kind of the balance sheet? Or is it a combination of, do you kind of equal weight, you know, the asset and the survivability of the balance sheet, or how do you kind of look at both those things?
So actually, I tend to separate those. So I have a list of companies whose science I love, who either don't have I'm waiting for a data set or I'm waiting for a balance sheet top up. You know, one that I think I wrote on PoC Capital recently was Lyra. It's a neat little implantable nasal, like this spongy stent-like device that elutes a steroid over time. So instead of taking the cortisone, you know, twice a day and hope that it stays in your nose, this thing gets popped in your turbinate, sticks around 6 months, and it's much more effective. And oh, by the way, there's none of this garbage. Will they be able to sell it for the 5,000? I think they can, probably not, but they have this neat little device. They've got two indications, sort of one post-surgery and one pre-surgery, different sizes and different sort of elutions. But when I met them, they're like, "Oh, you guys need $100 million." so love the science. So it's sort of now on my radar screen of companies I really like. And I bought a little bit just so I can have it on the screen and you know, who knows, right? Sometimes they have good data. It actually went up 30%, 40%. Then they raised money and they raised $50 million. So that gets them to 2 data points, which is great. And then after that, they went up some more. So like once they raised that money and sort of reduced the risk, it was on my screen because I like the science. And then they sort of checked the box on the financing. And they were really great about it. They said, we have to raise this money. It's coming, but we have a great program. And so we believe people are going to invest in us. We've got good investors who believe in the science. And so we'll raise the money with that group and we agree. So, you know, if you have management who sort of has that kind of confidence around being able to raise money and they have good science, then you know, get a piece now and just sort of wait a little bit. And when they check the box on the financing, or if you get invited to the financing, be part of it. You know, that's the best time to go. And then off you go. So I don't want to exclude a company because of the balance sheet, but it's definitely one of those, when I map my trade, when do I exit, when do I enter? And I'm part of it. A lot of times and this is one of my sort of side things, I'll actually invest in clinical trials. And if I find a company that has good science, has a balance sheet for their current item, and if they need a clinical trial, I've got play like a merchant bank role, and I find CROs to do it, and I'll pay for the trial by paying the CRO over time and trade stock for that. And that's actually how, you know, some of my big wins have been trading stock for a trial in a drug that I think works. And because shots on goal are the key to this biotech world, by adding a shot on goal, I could sort of fix that. So it's probably science is the primary, but as you map your trade, like you're never going to do it if you know they're going to invest in 10 days or have a finance.
I think you have a couple more slides. I'll let you finish and then I'll ask a couple more.
Yeah, so this is my last data slide. So this is the Life Science Opportunity Fund. So Manish and I, actually a few others advisors too, with kind of the primaries. Early in the first part of the bear market, we're like, yeah, this can't last. There's a lot of shit opportunities. We decided to create a small fund to sort of take advantage of it and just leverage the bets that we're making anyway. And as we've kind of marched into it, starting sort of March of 22, we've done okay versus the biotech, which has been getting killed still. And this is just following the theory where this is actually where we're equal weight. Fennec is the only double weight we have out of the bets, and we've only made 7 bets total, and we still have half cash, or the 500 grand that would have been the first cash. But this is our sort of pet project that eventually we'll sort of open up to others. But for now, it's just us as we get the process down. But this is when you take all the sort of screening and what have you, and then you sort of apply on, when East comes in, sort of apply more rigor around the portfolio management and the theory behind actually running the fund. You do okay.
What are the areas that you think you evolved the most, in this area that you invest in? Like, where do you think you've, tweaked the most and evolved?
I think the thing that's been the best, evolution to help me in sort of picking the winners is the way I deep dive. And as I talked earlier about the Colombo process of sort of asking very specific questions on very nuanced things in the process of developing the drug that may or may not have anything to do with the science, nor this is the process, to try to tease out, do they know what they're doing or not? If that's sort of the early on, Blue was a great winner, but I had 3 or 4 others where I believe in the science and made the theory, but they just didn't do the right thing. Like in clinical trial design, actually, this is one of the email questions. So in clinical trial design, in the phase 1 and phase 2, there's a lot of art in that, and so a good artist can have a positive trial, right? And so, but then you get to there's a CRO. The leader's Gaddy Cotter, and he's sort of ex-Duke guy and brilliant guy, but he will never have a phase 2 failure, ever. But he's had 100% phase 3 failures. So why is that? So you have to figure out, you have to really dig deep to understand, do they know what they're doing? And do they know what they're doing so much that they can, put lipstick on a pig and make it look great? So it's that process of digging in to figure out, is it lipstick on a pig, or is it, is this a lamb that's going to be great and make some great sweaters? How to deep dive. And so I've had to dig into a lot deeper on the process side and the sort of clinical trial art side, to be able to then ask the questions of the management team to be able to figure out, is what they're saying true? Because in any 10-slide presentation of a small microcap company, it's all great. So it'll all sound fantastic. There's no way it's not going to work. But really, it's about trying to find the no, or will this be a trade versus an investment? Because there's all kinds of lemmings in the space, and you're happy to follow the lemmings up for a bit and jump up before they have to find out that there's nothing there. But it's really digging down in the process and asking a number of questions to understand if there's a there that actually they know how to get there.
We had a question come in from Adu. He said, how would you change your investment style as an individual investor with less access to KOL opinions or management meetings?
So that's a tough one. That's one of the reasons I actually started called PoC Capital was so that I could have access. I'm batted about my weight on access. Actually, when I started, I had like 100 grand or something. It was really nothing. I was just sort of money is play money, and I was able to do okay with it. You almost have to have access to be able to really truly understand these companies. I don't know. I tell friends this all the time. There's a reason Main Street loses every time. Either it's been manipulated by different funds in Wall Street who are short hedge, and the savvies of the world who, yeah, we'll go in this deal, no problem. And their side fund that deals in the warrants will buy the warrants off this company, and then their other side fund, that's the short company, will short the good Jesus out of it. So they're winning in 3 different directions, and you have no idea it's happening. So as a private investor, it's really hard. Probably the best thing I'd say is if you don't have access to the KOLs, and you can't, because I license drugs from Mayo, I can call those guys all the time. So I do have access, which is fantastic. And it's really the only way it's possible to get an understanding. You'll have to find somebody who has access and, get their perspective. So, actually, if anybody wants to call me on any question, like, I just love this. I love the research on this stuff. Happy to talk about whatever and, point you in the right direction if you want to try to call a KOL. You'll be surprised if you go look on PubMed.com or PubMed.gov, find the paper on whatever mechanism that you're looking at. There'll be a lead author, and so the first name is the person who did the work. The last name is the elder statesman who signed off on the work. Either of those two will generally answer whatever question you want because they're academics and they love to talk about it. So that's actually one of the things it's been nice is if you make an email that sounds official, like Dave Johnson at lifesciencefund.com or whatever it is, email this academic, and they just love to talk about their science and say, hey, I read this paper, I'd love to talk to you about this mechanism. Do you have some time? I do that all the time, and there's anybody can cold call, right? It's not a life science thing. It's just anybody can cold call, and 9 times out of 10 they don't answer. But there's usually 5 authors on a paper, and there's like 5 papers on a topic, and so 10 emails you'll get one, and that one will know. They'll generally know enough about the space where you can dig into it.
It's great advice. I think that's a good place to leave it. We appreciate your time. How do people find you? Are you on Twitter or are you?
I have a Twitter account, but I don't use it. Really, it's just Daron at PoCCap.com. So Daron at PoCCap.com. Happy to chat with anybody. So as I said, this is the hobby that I love, that I'm hoping to keep it up.
Well, thanks for joining us. This was very educational and informational, and look forward to seeing your ideas on MicroCapClub as well. So thanks everybody for joining us.
Okay. Thanks everybody.
Take care.